Hello, mentors. Welcome to our podcast series, Mentorships in Education, brought to you by Just Education at justeducationfirst.com. I am your host, Judi Epstein. I am very excited about the wide range of experts who have volunteered to give of their time and expertise. They will share their innovative ideas, their exciting perspectives, their rich resources, and their research with us. Please continue to delve into these topics on their websites and with your legal counsel, healthcare provider, and education professional. Our guests will have information that will be relevant to mentors supporting struggling students, parents, teachers, administrators, legal support, and health professionals. We will address all levels of education with issues that affect academic performance. Our goal is to open discussions and introduce a variety of approaches to those searching for information in a free venue. So mentors, let me introduce our guests for today. Welcome mentors to Mentorships in Education podcast, brought to you by Just Education at justeducationfirst.com. I am Judi Epstein, your host. Today will be the last in our efforts to explore behavior as it relates to a myriad of challenges from reading to environment. Our guest today will address some of those issues that we've been talking about. I want to welcome Ylira Pimentel-Diaz. She is a psychotherapist. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you for having me. It's definitely an honor. And I believe that one of the things that I continuously encounter is a lack of concise collaboration across the board with macro and micro levels of interventions. And the fact that you're bringing this together is great. Great tool for a lot of your mentors.
Oh, that is so nice of you. I really appreciate that. Before we get into a discussion with you, though, I want to talk a little bit about your background. Ylira is bicultural and bilingual. She is a clinician with extensive behavioral health experience. She has a 15-year track record working successfully with diverse communities and within various settings, including residential, in-home, outpatient, and school-based. She has 12 years in behavioral health and 4 years in child development and education. She has clinical crisis prevention and intervention, case management, conflict resolution, research and administration, and the list goes on. Some of her experience and areas of expertise include child, adolescent, and adult psychotherapy, mindfulness practices, life and personal coaching, young adults in transition, and stress and anxiety depression. The list is quite long, and I don't want to continue. Some of our mentors can go to the website and find out more about you. One of the things that attracted me to you, and there's certainly a lot of psychotherapists out on with their name out on various social media. One of the things that attracted me to you was that you push that you use evidence-based intervention plans, and that I'm always interested in the research that people do to find, to focus their work, because there's so many things being thrown at us, and it's hard to sometimes choose what it is that we want to incorporate into our programs, especially when we're working with kids who have such struggles. So I'm curious, Ylira, if you can give me a little bit of information about why you became a psychotherapist.
Well, I mean, the decision to get engaged in the mental health profession actually came very early on. I was still a child. I had an experience where my mother brought me along to a session that my older brother was to have with a psychologist. And I was very interested and curious about the work. that this person was doing. And I told my mom that that's what I wanted to be. I was 8 years old. So it started very early on.
And you never wavered from that?
I never did. Despite hearing professors try to pull me into other directions. And, being bicultural, bilingual, an immigrant child who comes from a low-income family, a lot of people said, it's not a field where you're going to make financial, movement as much as you would like to and your family. So they said, why don't you go into another field, oftentimes, maybe medicine, maybe other sciences. And I was intrigued, and I knew that what I wanted to do is help people overcome the challenges they had. But I understood it also very early on from the perspective of the social context, because myself as a low-income person, I saw a lot of the struggles that many of our kids in schools face with the socioeconomic difficulties. So I knew that I wanted to be in the mental health professions. Later on, while completing my bachelor's degree in psychology at UMass Boston, I realized that I wanted to focus in the mental health field, but with a focus on the macro level influences on the mind. And that includes economics, that includes society, that includes so many of the things that we hear and we experience the government making decisions on nowadays.
And you never wavered from the time you were 8 years old?
I did not. I am telling you. I did not.
Pretty amazing.
I did not. I actually, it was interesting because a high school friend of mine wrote a little anecdote about her and I being on the Orange Line, because I lived and grew up in Boston, about me telling her that I wanted to be a psychologist. And she said, and she never wavered. And I am not a psychologist. I am a licensed independent social worker, given the reasons that I just mentioned, because I focus on the holistic aspect. But, it's interesting. I did not. I've had there's been moments where I say, I would like to be more economically independent, and I see my sister, who's a science major, making more money than I do.
Right.
That's
gotta hurt. That's gotta hurt.
She just graduated and makes more money than I do. But this is something that you do because of purpose.
That's right, and you're a psychotherapist, and that certainly is a calling. And I want to hear more about some of the profile of some of the individuals that you work with. But first of all, I want to talk a little bit about some of the protocols you use that you incorporate in your work with some of these young people or adults or that you work with, because these are areas that I also am trained in and have some experience in. So I'm very interested in finding out how you apply them. Can you talk to us about CBT, CPS, and mindfulness?
So cognitive behavioral therapy, as you know, has been extensively researched, has a lot of backing that is very helpful for moving any individual. I know we're focusing on children and adolescents, but cognitive behavioral therapy has been researched with all populations and different age ranges. One of the things that attracted me to it is that it's a modality that really focuses on helping people gain skills to replace the negative thoughts or negative patterns of thinking into more realistic and positive ones. And I believe that skill building is a way for teaching people freedom from a multitude of factors, including those that are related to trauma, whether it's interpersonal trauma or societal trauma, such as racism, or a lot of the socioeconomic factors that I laid out. I think that CBT is particularly helpful with that. So that attracted me to cognitive behavioral therapy. And one of the ways that I start with people is really providing them with psychoeducation about the cognitive triad. So how the thoughts have an impact on how the person feels and how the person behaves. So in a way, you're extrapolating some of that guilt that kids feel sometimes that is a problem within them, because they can really see that, well, if I work on my thoughts, maybe, if I analyze and think whether my thoughts are based on evidence, whether they're rational, then that means I can change the thoughts, but it's not that I'm intrinsically bad or something's wrong with me.
That's so important.
It is extremely important to externalize the behavior. So I think, CBT really is a great tool for that, and also the skill and healthy functioning for children.
Now, of course, Ross Greene is the one that was primarily developed CPS. They used to call it collaborative problem solving. I think now they call it collaborative proactive solutions. But how do you incorporate that?
So collaborative problem solving, I became involved with them through the Think Kids program, which was originally under the direction of Dr. Ross Greene and Dr. Stuart Ablin. Ross Greene is no longer with the Think Kids program, but Dr. Stuart Ablin is, and he trains nationally on the collaborative problem solving philosophy. So more than, it is a strategy, it is a tool, it's a modality to work with children and adolescents that are facing many of the issues that you listed in the beginning. What attracted me to it is the philosophy behind it, which is, as you know, think kids do well if they can. Mm-hmm. So the philosophy is that if the children are not doing well, it's because something is getting in the way. And it's focused on skill building, but primarily, and before any of that, what's most important is the relationship that the adult creates with a child or adolescent. So building good relationships where there's safety and trust is key to working with children, and that's what attracted me to Think Kids and their program. I did the Tier 1 and the Tier 2 training with them a number of years ago, and again, the philosophy, if you approach a child in thinking, why is this child having such a difficult time meeting this demand? Let me think about what skill he or she may be lacking. It's a different approach than this child is not listening, does not want to follow instructions, does not want to follow directions. It may be difficulty with frustration tolerance. So you may work teaching the child through collaborative problem solving to teach them how to tolerate frustration.
That's a huge difference, because very often we hear, and as a teacher, I hear other teachers or parents or even therapists sometimes saying that the child isn't motivated enough, mm-hmm. or the child is immature, or the child is more interested in socializing or being a clown in the classroom. Mm-hmm. And so what you're saying is, and what CPS says so clearly, is that motivation is not the issue. The skill gap is the issue. And what are some of the skills that you find most commonly underdeveloped in some of these kids who are having issues?
Definitely across the board, the social emotional skills, starting from feeling identification. A lot of the children and adolescents that we work with do not know exactly what they're feeling. They are more acting on impulse. And, no one wants to feel bad. No one wants to be having a difficult time. We all enjoy peace and happiness. But when a child is having a difficult time and it's dysregulated, oftentimes I've seen teachers, I've seen therapists, I've seen adults, including parents, trying to rationalize with the child or have them think how to solve a problem. But if the child is not regulated, their body is not ready to learn, ready to think, they're not going to be able to. So if we can start with teaching children what emotions are and how they're felt in the body, we can actually maybe prevent from feelings building up and then becoming an outburst. So one of the things that I see lacking is the recognition of emotions and recognition of the physiological changes that we go through when we're feeling an emotion. So if a child is feeling annoyed, is feeling a little frustrated, he might start feeling a little tense in his hands. He might feel a little tense in the back of his neck. And then if he's starting to get a little angry, he may feel, or she may feel the heart racing, a little sweaty. So if we're able to teach these signs before they get out of hand, children can act on them. So I think that's one of the main skills that I see lacking, the lack of feeling recognition, and then the lack of regulation. So not knowing how to use their breath, not knowing how to use their body to calm down, not knowing external coping skills, such as engaging in a little bit of mindfulness, some breathing and relaxation, recognizing some of the things that bring them joy, such as maybe going for a quick run, drawing, coloring a mandala, things like that, listening to music.
I used to have a student that I worked with that I was working with on mindfulness. And one of the things we were doing were breathing exercises. And he was, I think, in 3rd or 4th grade at the time. And he, he had permission whenever he needed to come and see me, he would say he needed to come and see Miss Judi. And there was never any argument or discussion about it. He was just able to leave the room. So he came in to see me in my office, and he walked in going, and he looked at me and he said, "The breathing exercises aren't working." And so, and it was, I didn't know whether to laugh or give him a hug, because he was trying it, but he was just so stressed. He just couldn't calm himself down. So how do you encourage the kids to implement these exercises, whether it be mindfulness and becoming aware of their thoughts? How do you get them to be more mindful of their thoughts? How do you get them to be more in tune with what it is they're thinking and feeling? Maybe people who are listening, maybe you can give them some strategies or suggestions of how to do that. This is definitely age dependent, correct? If we're talking about an elementary school age child versus middle school or high school, it will look different. But I think that one of the things that is very important for us adults to remember is that when we're having any type of interaction with a child, it's a teaching moment. So we can model through our own behavior, and we can have conversations that will help the children become more mindful. For example, if we notice that a child looks somewhat tense, somewhat anxious, I don't advocate or don't suggest that we label the emotion and say, "Hey, it looks like you're feeling sad." We don't know what's going on through their head, but we can say, "Hey, I notice your fists are a little clenched, and you look like you have a frown in your face. I wonder what's going on with you. I wonder." So just showing that curiosity and openness is important. There's obviously many exercises that we can engage them in that don't have to be long. It can be 1 or 2 minutes, very brief. For breathing, for example, one of the things that I found helpful for younger and older kids are tools such as blowing bubbles or giving them an That is so cool. I never even thought about that.
Yes. So blowing bubbles and, having them try, can you blow a quick bubble, a slow bubble? And they'll see that if they do it slower, then they'll get a bigger bubble. So that's one with the younger ones. And, little ones usually like to blow bubbles. Then there's tools such as breathing spheres that you open and you close. You can find them on many online stores. And those are helpful to also show how we expand our lungs and contract our lungs. You can also do the hand in chest and hand in stomach and do some belly breathing and show them how our lungs expand and our bellies expand. And
would you do these with middle school or high school students?
Yes,
you do.
I have.
Okay.
I have. I run a teen group. I ran a teen group 2 years ago for a program that I consult at Mass General Hospital.
Mm-hmm.
And we had a teen group in Chelsea, and we integrated some of these different strategies with teens, and they did do it, and they did enjoy it, and they learned a lot from them. So I think it's definitely something, even with adults. Now for this year, this just past year and this coming year, I will be running a parent group, and we utilize a lot of the skills and the psychoeducation that we provide for the teens in this parent group. And these are also some of the exercises that we'll be using with adults. So I definitely see this being useful across the age range. So those are some for breathing. There's definitely, the mindful bite, mindful eating that is very helpful. And, I often hear teachers and administrators say, well, we have so much going on. And I agree. Teachers have so much going on, so much work and material that they have to teach children, that there's very little room for other stuff. And, sometimes it feels like they're being asked to be a therapist when you bring in certain material or certain training programs. And we understand that, although it is complicated, it is sometimes difficult to integrate some of these things into the daily schedule already of a teacher. Some of these things can really help children learn better. Because again, if a child is not regulated, he will not be ready to learn. So something like during lunchtime, during snack time, for the little ones and for the older ones, lunchtime, a quick 1 to 2 minute check-in around mindful eating and teaching them the skill, I think is extremely helpful.
That would be great to do at lunch with the kids.
Mm-hmm.
I bet they would all enjoy doing something like that, not just a child who was having some problems.
Exactly.
Some of the other tools you've mentioned to me that you often incorporate are cognitive processing therapy, art therapy, and music. And I know in our previous conversation you said you're not using these all the time with all children. It's very individual, but can you explain them a little bit and when they may be appropriate?
Mm-hmm. Well, cognitive processing therapy is a type of cognitive behavioral therapy that has been helpful for people who have been diagnosed with PTSD or have experienced, a variety of traumatic events such as child abuse or rape and natural disasters. So the cognitive processing therapy has been more extensively researched with adults. There are some parts of it that, because it's so closely aligned and it is part of a CBT modality that can be utilized to work with children, and more so I would say the older, the tweens and teens who have been through traumatic events. So generally it is delivered in 12 sessions, but as you know, life is unpredictable, and work with children can be unpredictable and sometimes not consistent. So, So I train in cognitive processing therapy while working as a social worker at Mass General Hospital. And we started utilizing this modality with adults who had complex trauma and diagnosed with PTSD. And we quickly identified that although the model itself is designed for 12 sessions, that we needed to adapt that to the needs of the population in Chelsea. And we did them sometimes with longer sessions. Sometimes we did them with more sessions than 12. So just keep in mind that as we work with children, because things can be unpredictable, and it's better to develop a relationship with them before we try to push any type of modality or skill building, that it may not be necessarily what is in the manual written as 12 sessions. So part of the focus around cognitive processing therapy is that you work on changing unhelpful and automatic thoughts that the child or teen has developed as a result of the trauma. So, for example, let's say I'm thinking of a teen right now that was raped as a teen, and she developed this belief that if she had not gone out without a phone and had not worn what she wore that night, that she would not have gotten raped. So a lot of the automatic thinking is that it is my fault. I caused this, that produces oftentimes guilt and shame. And, the child just gets stuck in that pattern of thinking, and that implicitly affects other areas of their life, including self-esteem and self-confidence. And ultimately, we see that in decreasing grades and failure academically, because oftentimes they're unable to concentrate and to focus on what they're being taught in the classroom if they're having recurrent thoughts about their trauma.
Do you feel that all children in a classroom should be assumed to have experienced some kind of trauma? And I say this because another teacher and I, when we used to work together, kind of took the position that a lot of things may have happened to some of these kids that we don't know about. And sometimes the expression of something as simple as refusing to do a simple task may have something to do with a thought that's gone through their head about some previous experience, or has been connected to a previous experience. It could be, I don't know how you clinically define trauma, but if emptying the wastebasket and is a chore that a child won't do, and that's connected to the father or mother who was abusive whenever the child forgot to do the chore of emptying the wastebasket, I perceive that as trauma. I'm not sure if that's clinical trauma, but we used to look at every child and just assume that every child has had some traumatic experiences in their lives that may manifest itself in this aberrant behavior. What's your feeling about that?
That's a complex question because it's so layered. and my instinct is to say that almost every individual walking on this earth has had some type of trauma. And usually these happens, early on in child development, in the early years. But what I would like to go back to is that whatever behavior the child is expressing has a purpose and has a reason. So if the child does not want to empty the trash barrel, does that mean that the child does not have the skills or has trauma? But again, it comes from a line of compassion. It always comes from, I wonder what is producing this behavior. So whether it's trauma, whether it's skill building need, the philosophy still, what does the child need in order to be able to complete this task, rather than this child does not want to. Right? Okay,
that's a good point. That's a good point. I think we just decided to err on the side of caution. I guess
but I agree with you. I know that a lot of the high schools, not sure about early on, but the high schools, at least, I've noticed that they have been in health classes giving children sometimes stress checklists to see how high their stress is. And oftentimes we are surprised as to how many, different situations that children are struggling with. So, there's been a lot of research on early trauma and how many of these events happen in the early life that ultimately have impact on our health overall. So going back to cognitive processing therapy, I think that, again, it's a skill building modality, and part of it is focusing on different areas that may be impacted when you go through trauma, such as safety, how safe you feel in the world, how safe you feel with yourself, The other area that CPT focuses on is trust. How able are you to trust other people again? And the next one is power. So how much power do you think that you have over the things that happen in your life? Next one would be control. Again, along the same lines with power, but how much control do you think you have of the things that are happening in your life? And esteem and intimacy. So how do you see yourself, and how are you able to relate to other people? So going through these areas, you can work with people and identify what are some of the unhelpful or negative thoughts that people may have in these areas, such as, for example, with the teen girl that was raped and was thinking that if I hadn't left my phone and if I hadn't worn those clothes, as a therapist, you go through some of the questions would be, do you feel safe now going to the corner store on your own? And why is that you feel this way? So you kind of investigate with the child how much has safety been impacted, not only in the situation that it occurred, in the place that it occurred, but as you know, with trauma, children and every individual can generalize into other areas. So does the child feel unsafe now at school? Does the child feel unsafe now at home? So again, it's a process where you navigate these different areas and find out what are the thoughts. And if there's any unhelpful thoughts, you help the child or the individual really think about, is this based on evidence or is this based on what happened in the past? So again, you're bringing the person into the present moment, which goes back into mindfulness. So all these things are interrelated, and they fuse, they work very nicely with each other, because a lot of the mindfulness is, focusing on the present, on the now. Parents,
I think this will be helpful to parents as well as teachers. We don't have to get into the therapeutic session with these kids. We don't have the time, nor do we have the skills. But sometimes we can probe a little bit and get some background information by asking these reflective questions, so that we can see whether there's a red flag there that we can recommend needs to be pursued. I think those were really great suggestions. You also said that you use art therapy and music sometimes, and I realize that that's very individual and may not be applicable to all students. You use a little bit of yoga. I'm wondering how important it is for you to include the parents when you're working with young people, whether they're, preschool or college age kids. How important is it if the kids are living at home, how important is it for the parents to be involved in?
It is extremely, extremely important to involve the parents. I have not worked to this point with any child or teen where an adult has not been involved, whether it's a parent, whether it's a grandparent or not that has gained custody of the child, whether it's that the child is in foster care or involved with the Department of Children and Families. It is important to have a collaborative relationship with the adults in the life of the child, so that what is being discussed and what is being learned in session with the child can be generalized with the adults in the life. When you think about it, for myself as a therapist, and I know that there will be parents and there will be other adults, including mentors and teachers, listening to this, that as a therapist, when I sit with a child, you may have 45 minutes, sometimes less, 30 minutes or an hour with the child, but the other 23 hours are not with the therapist. Right. And if the other 23 hours in the day, and then you add that to the other 24 hours in the other 6 days that the child does not see you, wow. Then, I believe it's like 168 hours a week.
Oh my gosh, I never thought of it like that.
You only get 1 hour with that child. And, right. No matter what it is that you do, let's say for us adults, you work out for 1 hour a week, and then the rest of the week you don't work out and you eat unhealthy foods. The benefits are going to be very limited. So I think the same with children. It is imperative that the adults are involved so that they learn about their child, they learn about themselves, because as we learn about our children, and then we learn about our students, we're also learning about ways that we ourselves might be triggered or might be reacting in unhelpful ways to children, given because we're not a blank slate. We are also human beings reacting to situations. So it's a way for us to also gain some mindfulness and some awareness of ourselves.
So if parents are doing some of this observations with their children, teachers are doing some of this observation with their students, what are some of the red flags that you think they should be looking for that might give them, I mean, a child's explosive at home, parents trying to find what that might be, a child is being very aggressive in class, teachers trying to be helpful in finding out what might be triggering that. What are some of the red flags that you feel might be helpful in helping them evaluate this?
So definitely some of the physical changes that you may see in a child, changes in eating and sleeping habits, the irritable behavior is definitely one. But are you seeing hyperarousal? Are you seeing the child waking up in the middle of the night? Are they having nightmares? Are they having some jumpiness? Do you see them getting worried about things that they had not gotten worried before, or their worries are increasing? Do you see them, again, just ruminating, talking a lot about things that are worrying them? Are they avoiding places, things, and people? Are they more isolated? Are they not talking to their friends? Are they now engaging or getting closer to friends who are doing illicit things, who are getting in trouble? Who are their friends? Who are they sitting with in recess, at lunchtime? Do you notice any bruises, marks, burns, cuts? I mean, children, especially with teens, we have to be careful that they're not involved in unhealthy relationships. They start dating in their teenage years. So it's important to notice that. Any physical marks. Do they start talking about death? Are they preoccupied with death? And again, the isolation piece is very important, because this is a time where teens reflect a lot on their identity, and they're trying to find themselves. So a lot of their identity comes from their interactions that they have with the outside world, including their circle. So it's important to know who their friends are and what they're being influenced by. The other thing to think about is, are they preoccupied with sexual topics more so that is for their age, what is typical for their age. And then overall, I would say, as a parent, it's important to also remember that when the child is dysregulated, when they're having a difficult time, it may be a good time to be present and tell them that you're there to hear them out and support them when they're ready to, but that when they are calm and when they are having a good time, it may be the time to have a conversation with them. Sometimes we try to have conversations with teens when they're really having a tough time, and that is very difficult to do.
That is a great list. I'd actually like to make that available on the podcast. Maybe we can explore how we might be able to do that. Mm-hmm. You also work with schools as an advocate and supporting the needs of some of the students. So what are some of the areas where you feel that schools are in most need of support with students? What do you see is if it's lacking or if it's not being developed properly? What are some of the problematic areas you're seeing in schools today?
There's a lot of focus on being more inclusive in academic settings, and that means providing children who have different needs more opportunities to be included in mainstream. But I think we have to be careful with when we do that, that we provide the students with the support necessary within the classroom. And I say this because sometimes kids who have gone through trauma or who are going through some difficulties emotionally are not, those needs are not being addressed through an IEP or 504, and these children fall through the cracks because they may not have a deficit with academic factors. They may not have a deficit with math or reading, but they may be lacking some support, some emotional support. And sometimes I think these kids are again tagged with being disruptive or being the clown in the classroom. And what they're seeking is connection and attention. So I think that that's one of the things that I see lacking, that some of these children are being sent suspended, and there's a clear association between the suspension and rates with ending up in jail. So the school to prison pipeline, in that when these children start being labeled early on as a problem child, we're definitely affecting their identity, their ability to see themselves in another light. And that trickles into more problematic behavior later on in their life. So we just have to be very careful with the way that we see children. Going back to the philosophy, kids do well if they can from Think Kids. Right. I think it's important when we are ourselves as adults struggling, and for us to catch ourselves saying, I just caught myself saying this kid is a problem. I just caught myself thinking, I don't want to go to work today because I know this child will be there. Just to catch ourselves and be compassionate with ourselves, not to label ourselves and not to feel blame or shame, because that does not help us, but rather to think of ways to address it and to be more compassionate with ourselves and others.
That's great advice. Maybe I'm sure that we could explore that more at some point. Just to kind of segue a little bit, I understand you did some work at Mass General Hospital for a while. Is that correct? Mm-hmm. Can you talk a little bit about what you did there? That's a huge hospital, and I'm wondering how you, what role you played.
So as part of my graduate studies, Mass General Hospital was my internship placement. I interned in 2012 at the Mass General Hospital Chelsea Health Care Center. I was there for a year, and then I remained with them as a staff upon graduation for 4 years as a licensed independent clinical social worker. And those 4 years, I saw children, adolescents, and adults. I did a lot of family work and dyadic work with parents and their teens or children. Oftentimes, there was complex trauma in the families for many reasons, including socioeconomic that we discussed, immigration, poverty, that were definitely impacting many things, including the academic progress of children. Oftentimes it was the teacher recommending the child to come in for help, or someone else in the medical field, sometimes parents. But that's the work that I did with Mass General. After that, I went into private practice, and I was hired at Mass General as a consultant for 2 programs. One is the Resilience Program.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about that. What is that?
So the Resilience Program focuses on helping children up to the age, also adults up to the age of 30, on so they work with children, adolescents, and adults ages 10 to 30 who are interested in building, increasing their resilience, which means their ability to cope with the stressful situations that happen in their life. So they identified about 3 years ago now a need for programming in Chelsea for teens. And the programming that they wanted to build was one built upon skill building and resilience, which is very related to the cognitive behavioral therapy that we talked about, and mindfulness as well. So for them, because I had worked in Chelsea, I understood the population well, and I had experience running groups for teens and adults. They hired me as a consultant, and I co-developed and co-led a teen group 3 years ago for them. Also co-developed the curriculum for the teen group. And last year, because we understand the benefits of including caregivers and parents in treatment, we added a parent component where we teach parents some of the skills that the children are learning. So the first time for this group, we did a parent group last year. And this third year, we will also be doing a teen group along with a parent group.
Wow, that's exciting.
Mm-hmm.
That's very exciting. I think one of the gaps in our society is helping kids who do leave high school prepare for that transitional period. And does this program help them do that, or is this for an older population?
The program that I was involved with as a consultant is for teens, 11 to 14.
Oh, so this is that's young.
Okay. That's a younger group. But yes. The Resilience program does work with young adults. They have several programs, including in some of the local universities, where they have clinicians go in and run resilience programs, resilience groups. So the resilience program at MGH does do that, just not that I am involved with that one.
I'd love to see that more permeate more of the country, because I think there's a huge gap with kids who are leaving high school and they really don't know what they're going to do with themselves. And I think it would be great for them to have a resource to be able to dialogue with someone who might help them understand what their strengths are.
I agree.
I am so happy that you were with us today. Thank you so very much, Ylira Pimentel-Diaz. And I want to thank our previous guests for making so much time to be on our podcast. Thank you, mentors, for joining us. Please go to justeducationfirst.com and subscribe so you won't miss out on any future topics. We do have some interesting guests and some mini-series coming down the way that may be of interest to you or maybe someone that you know. Please subscribe, and I always appreciate your feedback if you have suggestions for guests or suggestions for topics. Stay tuned in. We have more coming. Thank you all and have a wonderful day. Thank you, mentors, for being with us today. If you found this podcast of value, please visit justeducationfirst.com to subscribe to our blog and mentorship and education podcast so that you may continue the exploration with us. Our goal is to provide a free treasury of information for our listeners so they can become acquainted with the amazing resources that we have available to us. We want to thank all of our guests for giving their time and sharing their wealth of information with us. Please also visit their websites and explore more of their resources to further your pursuit of the topic. Hope to hear from you at justeducationfirst.com. Have a good week, and thank you.